Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome to First Cut. This is a very special episode of A Talk on Titan, all about talking Attack on Titan. I'm here with a very special guest. Joining me today, I have Lost Futures in the house. Lost, how you feeling, man?
Hey, I'm doing good. Getting ready to take on those Attack on Titan fans in your comments too.
Yeah. Obviously, man. For anyone who doesn't know,
I'm kidding.
Lost.
I'm not gonna fight you.
No worries, no worries. For anyone who doesn't know, Lost Futures has made a couple videos of Attack on Titan. The one I found was something that I saw right after I finished the finale. It's called Attack on Titan is Still Fascist, I believe is the title.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've been avoiding ever since I was watching Attack on Titan because I'm an anime only. So, as an anime only, I've been avoiding people who've been whispering in my ear about the manga, telling me, hey, man, be careful out there. Attack on Titan's going crazy. And I always told them, like, give me a sec to finish the anime because I want to see it in this kind of format. This is the format I chose to see it in. This is my version of Attack on Titan, regardless of what the manga does. So I've been waiting and putting off all these videos, a lot of FD videos in my feed and stuff talking about Attack on Titan. I had to pause them and turn it off because I haven't finished the show. Now that I did, I watched this video. I'm excited to have you on, man, because I do feel like it's important to hear your kind of perspective. And now that
Yeah.
most people have finished the show, I think it's actually very important. So I'm curious to get your takes. The first thing I want to start off with, man, is obviously this is one of the biggest anime of all time. Attack on Titan is massive. But what is
Mhm.
your journey with Attack on Titan? How did you get into it, and how has it been throughout this entire journey?
So I first found it in 2017. No, 2017, 2013. I was in high school. I was like a little kid. I avoided watching it for a good 2 years because I thought it was overhyped. It's basically like nowadays, like Chainsaw Man, where people are like, "No, I'm not watching that. It's too hyped." People are just overhyping it. I'm not gonna watch it. It looks silly. It looks dumb. So I put off watching it for a good 2 to 3 years, and then I jumped into it. And at first, I liked it. Okay, like I admit it, I was a fan. Once Levi showed up, that's it. I was like, this is the story. This is the man who's gonna change the story. So I watched it for a good 2 seasons. And then I wanted to find out what was in the basement. So I kind of dropped it, but ever like looming in the background was the idea of like what's in the basement? What's he gonna show? What's the truth? What is this manga about? So sometime later I picked it up and I found out what's in the basement. And I wasn't impressed. So again I dropped it. Um and I was like, okay, I know what's in the basement. I don't care. Whatever. Whatever, right? Uh 2019 comes around and I was like, okay, you know what? It's been like a good span of years since I've read this. Let's watch the anime, let's read the manga. And that's when like I saw two things kind of unfolding. The first was the ocean scene where Eren kind of points across the ocean. He's like, "Hey, we could get our freedom if we just kill all those enemies on the mainland." And I was like, "Okay, that's a weird kind of thing to say, man." So that was the anime. Like I caught up to the anime, and then I picked up the manga where he took a break. Then, like that's when the time skip happened, and you arrive in Marley, and you see the interned Marleyans. And at that point, I was like, okay, this is weird. Like, what is going on? Who are all these characters? What's he gonna do with this new cast of characters? And I read up until I think when Eren waged his war on Marley, like when he attacked the the parade of Tiber, where
Liberio.
yeah, where he has that big show. So he attacks there, and then he goes on into like the war between Parody and Marley, and I dropped it. I'm like, okay, I think I know how this is gonna end. I could already foresee the rumbling, right? And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm not gonna actually finish this, you know? Like
Hmm.
hot take to the people out there who watch my videos and are like, man, you spent like 2 hours of your life making two 1 hour long videos and you dropped this show like five times. I know it's a bit challenging to hear that I'm not like the biggest fan, but again, once like near the end, I picked it up again. I was like, okay, here we go. The end is near. This is it. I'm gonna finish it. And I read it till the end. So that's kind of my long string of history with Attack on Titan. And throughout each and every single part of it, my attitudes changed because my politics and what I was learning changed. So like at first I didn't have a bare sense of the reading, but each time I started rewatching it, I kind of started noticing a bit of like fascist elements. And I in my video, my second part, I trace this back to the beginning where it's like the main thesis isn't about, liberating or helping refugees or helping the poor or helping the suffering, but it's about like killing titans. And that works for that first half. But then as you pick up the show and continue as I picked up the show and continued watching, you could notice like thematically that he starts adding new theses into his show, where it's like midway through the point after Sasha dies. Spoilers for people out there: Sasha dies. I know best girl dies. Uh, he throws in the idea of like getting peace and making peace with your enemy and finding and working together. And then I'm like, okay, this is like it's really messy, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Uh, with every single reading that I got to.
Yeah, it's definitely. I would say I don't know if messy is the word I would use. It's definitely like sporadic. I guess it's like all over the place, kind of
Right, yeah, okay,
jumping
that'd be
from
a better.
one thing to another, one point to
Yeah,
another, one reveal to another.
right.
Um, that's kind of the rhythm of Attack on Titan. I definitely take that in, even as a fan. I think the biggest thing, the next thing I want to jump into, and the biggest thing you notice in Attack on Titan, at least I notice, and I've noticed following the show since day one, is the fan base, and knowing
Yeah,
how the fan base has slowly become more and more, or quickly become, I guess, more and more just bizarre and
yeah,
very angry and
yeah.
aggro and weird with the weirdest perspectives and things. When did you start to notice the fan base kind of take a turn?
I think it started when the Liberio camp showed up, where they were like, okay, these people clearly resemble Jewish people in Nazi Germany. And then you have people starting to debate whether or not if it's true or like if it actually makes sense. And at that point I was like, okay, this is really weird. Like this is really bizarre that you're debating this. But I like you kind of shunned off the manga people who kind of get into the depth of the manga. For me, it was kind of the same. I was kind of like, okay, I'm noticing this side of the fan base who are really getting into um the the kind of the fashy nature of the interned Eldians, but I didn't want to engage with it. So I kind of shunned them off for a time until they started debating the genocide. That's when the big red flag happened for me. I was like, okay, you guys are now debating genocide and eugenics and kind of like throwing these really heavy topics for some people, like it's just thin air that you're just juggling around. Like, okay, guys, it's time to debate genocide, but let's not take it seriously because both both sides are being genocidal, and then you have like the liberals and the centrists coming at it. And for me, that was the red flag that kind of nailed it, that the fan base has been uh being kind of odd and bizarre, but at the same time that's like the tip of the iceberg. And some things I don't get into are like the people who theorize the original ending of Attack on Titan
Hmm.
and get into this really weird theories about how like it's a message of Christianity and Christ and whatnot. Like there are layers of this
Yeah. Uh,
of this fan base.
it's kind of insane. I do feel like there's no denying that it's probably the most insane fan base in anime, and that's saying a lot, considering how insane already anime fan bases are. I think something I take in from your video and something I bring up in my notes is kind of the idea of when you say media literacy. There's
Hmm.
been this topic of conversation over the past, I mean, it's been happening forever, but especially over the past 10 to 15 years about how media literacy is dead. If
Hmm.
I mean, it's been dead, but I
Right.
feel like if I have a pushback for you, this is probably my first one. I feel like most of this comes from media literacy that we know to be pretty much in your face against what most people are taking in. The
Right.
biggest examples probably of all time are The Matrix. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I take the actual reading of The Matrix, and a lot of
Yeah.
people take that reading as completely entirely different. And then there's obviously recent shows like The Boys,
Hmm.
Invincible is one that,
Yeah.
another Prime show where people are like adamant Viltrumites are right. Like, Homelander is saving us. He's saving everyone. And it's like this is the kind of readings that we're used to getting. I can think of
Hmm.
Breaking Bad all the way back in around this
Yeah.
era of 2013 and 2012, where people about adamant about Walter White. There's this kind of reading as far. I mean, obviously you mentioned Fight Club as well. I feel like there's this idea of like the really extreme right people taking these kind of different ideologies and interpreting it in their right wing kind of ideology, and
Hmm.
yet you're kind of reversing that. You're kind
Hmm.
of taking Attack on Titan and saying you should get a right wing rating from it, even
Yeah.
though I personally am not getting that, and I'm trying to
Right.
read it in that different version.
Hmm.
Where do you feel like that line is as far as media literacy? Because I feel like most people do want to engage with it in a positive way and do want to take something positive away from it rather
Yeah.
than people who look at shows like The Boys or Breaking Bad and are like,
Oh,
I want to be like Homelander. I want to be like Walter White.
no, 100%. That's a good point and a good challenge too. But first thing I want to clarify is that my title, "Media Literacy is Dead," was a jab on another YouTuber
Okay.
who made a YouTube video called "Media Literacy is Dead," something something Attack on Titan, and I took his. They changed their title. I took their title, and because what they did was read it in a very positive light, right? They did not criticize the Siyama. They did not look at the fascism. They completely ignored it, right? And basically, his fans came after me. Like he didn't intentionally send them after me, but it was almost like his video was countering my video and basically claiming that anybody who reads it as a fascist take doesn't have media literacy. And so randomly their fans came to my comments and they were like, "Your media literacy is dead." And it just kept repeating. And then they would actually name the YouTuber and be like, "Blah blah blah, sent me over here. Your media literacy is dead. You should watch their video and respond to their video." And eventually, I did watch the video, and what came out of that was part two. And I agree that there are multiple different readings of text, but part of media literacy and part of reading a text is acknowledging the fascist elements and not just unquestioningly reading it in a positive light, right? And that's kind of what bugged me about that YouTuber. I'm not gonna name them, but basically what they did was focus 100% on the positive, which is justified. You could do that all you want. But at the same time, you're not criticizing the author, you're not criticizing the fascism, the Japanese fascism, the symbols of anti-Semitism, and all these negative things that, like, if you really, really think about it becomes hard to actually get that singular positive reading out of it. And so my title wasn't to say media literacy is dead. That's it. There's only one reading and it's fascist, but it was more like a an Uno reverse on that YouTuber to say, "Hey, there's also the negative context that you're completely missing out on, and it's important to get out of." And I think a lot of people took out from my video that there's only a singular reading, that it's fascist. But I mean, I've engaged with a lot of comments in my videos where I deliberately state that that's not the intention of my video. Rather, it was to point out that as an author, when you put in these, and a lot of people came after me for saying that they're portrayals, right? Maybe we'll get into that later. But my replies to that was basically like the author has a responsibility when including these heavy and sticky themes in their writing, and they have to do the research to incorporate them, right?
Yeah.
So you don't get readings that are pro-fascist, that are pro-doomer, that are anti-Semitic.
Yeah. Do you feel like you place a lot of authority inside the creator or the author? Do you feel like that's a big responsibility? Would you feel the same way for, again, shows that I just mentioned, The Matrix, The Boys, Breaking Bad? Do you feel like there should have been a clear, I'm not doing this to like, that's a genuine question I have. I
No,
feel, because I personally feel that way about, sir, I feel that way about The Boys personally. I feel like The Boys is just sometimes edginess for edginess sake.
yeah,
And I feel like the author should be a little bit more clear as far as like, I don't know. Everyone who watches The Boys, I'm convinced like they're all just trolls on Twitter, because
yeah,
they all take the worst things out of that show, where they're just like, see the corporate shills and the corporate wokes and the wokes and the wokes, and I'm like, that's. I feel like the author shouldn't focus on that inside the text so much, but
yeah.
that's just me. Do you feel like there should be more from creators and
I think the
people to make it
difference
clear?
between The Boys, Invincible, Star Wars, Breaking Bad, and I forgot the other one you mentioned. But
Matrix.
the Matrix is that the writers who come together to write these shows have a clear thesis when writing them. There's a clear endpoint when writing these shows. And so when they weave the story, what happens is that you get that spotlight on the negatives, right? You get that nuanced take. And the difference in Isayama's writing is that, as you said, it's sporadic. In different times of the story, he randomly incorporates things that were never part of the initial story. Like never in part one, never in like yeah, part one, let's say, were the plight of the Eldians ever mentioned. Like sure they're in walls, right? But you never get that idea that uh Reiner, Annie, and Bertolt were also oppressed in Marley. Like you get that PTSD from Reiner, but you're never ever shown in that part one about their suffering and what they went through. And so the differences between those shows and how they portray fascism, portray authoritarianism, portray violence even, is that they're able to juxtapose it in the story. They're able to juxtapose it through screenwriting, through facial expression, through acting, and many other ways that people read text. Like
Yeah.
just look at Homelander's actor, you know? Like the way he portrays the fascism is so clear. Like there's no you can't just look at Homelander and be like, okay, it's a gray area here. It's very nuanced. He
And yet,
he's so much alike like Eden,
yeah.
he has all the power and he's just doing it because he's just a sad boy, I don't know.
I feel like that's kind of exactly what I've heard, like verbatim. But again, we can move on from that because I feel like that's a different show. But I do feel like there are those people out there that will take those readings regardless, and I feel like that's the frustrating thing on my part, who tries to engage a little bit more with these stories and runs into those kind of fan
Yeah,
bases.
yeah, and for people who do get a positive thing out of Attack on Titan, for those who celebrate it and enjoy it, my video was not to come after those people
Yeah,
and basically like attack them, right? I
sure.
think a lot of people in the comments got offended and got really hurt that I called their favorite show fascist.
Yeah.
But if you got something positive from the story and if you learned something, that's great, man. But at the same time, you can't ignore Isayama's writing of fascism in the story and just cleanly wipe it off.
Yeah, let's get into it. I want to obviously get into Attack on Titan. Something that I take when I watch a show, um, specifically when it comes to reading the text and reading what's inside the show, and obviously the subtext as well,
Mhm.
is the framing, the tone, the filmmaking aspect of what an anime is. Obviously, again, as a non-manga reader, I can't necessarily put myself in those people's shoes and what they could have read from it. But as an anime viewer only, I do pay attention to cues, music cues, again, acting, framing, all this kind of stuff that really tells you what they're trying to say. And personally, I was watching your points in your video, and I really did feel like everything you named it like in a positive light. Like Aaron says, we got to kill those people over there. That scene to me was like supposed to be like, this is evil.
Right.
It was very clearly like, this is bad, this is wrong. I never took it as like, yeah, this is our protagonist, we're gonna follow him to victory. I always took it as like, oh, Aaron's going down this evil path, a very clearly evil path.
Okay.
That's the ratings that I've had for most of the stuff you named was stuff that I read in a very negative light.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. I know you want to jump in.
I think the counter to that is how these these negative scenes are treated in the anime, right? Like Armin and Mikasa and probably Levi all knew Eren Eren's intention of mass murdering the mainland. Like they all knew, and there are multiple like flashbacks Armin has where he's like, there could have been another path, there could have been another way of doing this, and then he flashbacks to Eren's ocean moment. But but at that point, it's already too late. Eren's already initiating the rumbling, and
I
so
yeah.
yeah, no, jump in.
I feel like they all feared it. I feel like there's a difference between they all knew it and they all feared it. There's this idea in Attack on Titan, and a lot of your points as far as are the crew let Eren do what he did.
Yeah,
I feel like they all had an inclination as far as like, my friend has always had weird anger tendencies. I
right.
pray and I hope and I still believe deep down inside he's a good person. And then they realize like, oh shit, he's not. He's gonna trample the world. But that first inclination, that first idea of a friend you had your entire life is,
Right.
I still think he's a good dude deep down inside. You don't want to believe that the friend you've had your whole life is actually evil. He's not going to actually follow up. He's just speaking out of anger. Like, I think that's what their thought process was. It wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily like, oh, I already knew this guy was a killer and he wanted to kill everyone, so I just let him do it. I felt like it was more like, I feared it. I never wanted to believe it. So deep down inside, I kind of lied to myself to make
Right.
myself believe that he could have been a good guy, but he never was.
So that speaks true to Armin and Mikasa, but not Levi, because Levi's entire role was to basically police Eren. Like, that's his job. His job is to basically put the chain on Eren, so that if his violent tendencies do show up, he's the man who's supposed to take out Eren. That's
Yeah.
his job, right? That's how he was introduced. Like one of the first scenes where he shows up, he's like kicking Eren's face in Parliament to show them that he has full control over Eren. So Armin, Mikasa, all the gang have that inclination, and they have the right to that. But Levi, like maybe Levi grew soft over time, and maybe he kind of like was like, okay, maybe I could trust Eren now. He saved us all. But at the same time, that kind of narrative doesn't fit with Levi because he's extremely cold. He at certain situations has been shown to just mercilessly kill his own comrades because they're showing Titan tendencies, right? And so, yeah, I don't know. I agree to with that point about how they're sentimental with their friends, but that twist from where it happens, like a lot of people skim over that when they're reading or watching Attack on Titan, where the rumbling happens because it's really climactic, it's really action focused. But if you watch that, like Armin is putting his blind trust that Eren Yeager, this now and people don't call him the fascist leader, but he's the leader of the Yeagerists, is going to initiate the rumbling to save the island. And then you have that sharp twist where Armin was like, "Oh, oh fuck. Oh fuck. He's not protecting the island. Oh fuck, look at all these titans. This is not enough for protecting the island. This is ready for a mass murder. And you could like see it in his face, and rightly so, there's the horror. But at the same time, it's like you had you had that opportunity to stop your friend, but
Yeah.
instead you chose to trust him.
Yeah, but again, I feel like that's human nature is to kind of believe that your friend wouldn't do that, like not your best friend, like that, like he can be violent, he can be all this stuff, but you kind of, I feel like that's true to human life. You lie to yourself when you actually are around certain
I don't
people.
know. I'm thinking about my best friend if this was the case.
But I mean that's
But,
how I've always read it. It's
but at
like
the same time,
you lie to
those
yourself.
readings are justified, right?
Yeah,
Like my video wasn't to
yeah,
completely dismiss those readings, but to also highlight that in certain moments, Levi, Armin, Mikasa, Jean all showed that naive trust in Eren
they
that
do.
led up to the rumbling, right?
Yeah, they do, and I feel like that's part of it too. That's part of why they carry this kind of weight towards
Mm,
season 4, and at the end of season 4, they have this kind of sense of responsibility to stop the rumbling because of what, because they let it happen, like you said. So I
yeah,
do feel like it comes back narratively and story wise. Something else I want to jump into real quick from your notes is the Eldian restorationist. You talk a lot about them in
yeah.
your videos. Um, I never saw the Eldian restorationists as anything positive. Every time they were on screen, they sounded psychotic and
Yeah.
insane and like a cult, and just clearly just wrong in all
Yeah.
the wrong ways. Maybe I found it hard to say that Isayama or Isayama was kind
Mhm.
of writing in their POV from their perspective and putting himself in their shoes and kind of saying like this is the best, transference of interpretation between what Japan could be. The Eldian
Right.
restorationists, I always saw them as like the other side of like a coin where even Grisha says, I should have learned the dangers of indoctrination.
Right.
He says that word indoctrination, like that's a strong
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
When he's talking about Zeke, and then he says, this was wrong in my light as well. And we
Mhm.
see how insane and psychotic Grisha sounds throughout season 4 when he's talking to Zeke. He's like screaming and his voice is cracking. He sounds
Yeah.
like a sociopath. And that's the point. The point was the Eldian restorationists were also insane, and they didn't know how to take in uh, what they were trying to do, and that's why their misinterpretations and misreadings were led them to obviously annihilation as well. So
No, for sure. There's definitely a reading that they are kind of unhinged and kind of a cult, but at the same time, you have to question why are like, and this is in the context of like the Nazi interned concentration camps where where Jewish restorationists didn't rise, right? That's not the historical context that happened. And if Isayama is basing this off Jews in Nazi Germany, he should have based the Eldian restorationists off the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where Jews banded together and rebelled against Nazi Germany. But instead, he has to like turn the narrative because you have to get the Jägeres in the final saga, right? So basically what he did was he incorporated the Eldian restorationists. He put in their idea that they want to restore Eldia, and sure they all die, quotes, except for Grisha, but their ideas still live on and still impact the fascist future of parody. And so in my light, like, yeah, that reading is justified, but then you have to look at the outcome of what exactly Eren does with that information and what the Aegidists do after Eren attacks the rumbling, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I do feel like if anything, that just kind of adds to what I'm trying to say, because I think the Jaegers are just another example of just being the absolute worst. Just every time they're on screen, I don't think I've ever heard the creepiest violins
Yeah.
of all time. It's just nonstop creepy violins, creepy, eerie music, a flock like twirling his mustache. Like to me, the Jaegers are never painted in in anything but like, yo, these are like the most Nazi looking dudes I've ever seen.
No,
Uh,
100%.
and then when Oyan Capone gives his little speech to them, where
Yeah,
he says like I left my country to stop Marley, this fascist empire, and now I'm coming to another fascist empire. Like you guys are nothing but like the world's gonna end and the only thing left is you xenophobic shits, is what he
exactly.
says.
They're basically celebrating it as it's
Yeah,
happening.
and they're all cheering him on. And Flock literally says, "This guy did nothing wrong, but I'm gonna blow his head off." I was like, "This is very clearly showing you fascism
That
is
is,
bad."
yeah.
Like that's the only reading I think you could take away from Jaegerist.
So I'm gonna counter that, right?
Okay,
I'm gonna politely counter that, and by showing that yes, they are portrayed in a negative light, but there's no actual anti-fascist action that's taken against them, right? When Hanji speaks to them, she's like, "Hey, Pixis has agreed to talk to you guys for peace." Like basically saying like if you stop your violence, we're agreeing to speak with you fascists. Like that's our solution to handling the rising of fascism in Parody. And then you have that speech, right, where he's talking about how he's now seeing the rise of fascism, but then is juxtaposed with Armin, Jean, and basically the gang kind of like struggling with the idea of fighting against their friends. And it's like, okay, my guy Gene, I know I like you, but at the same time, like, yeah, they're your friends, but they're also fascists. And you can't really like, take a light approach to fascism in your country. And this is shown perfectly when Connie and Armin face off against the two Jaegerists, where they're like, I can't kill you. I can't kill you because you're my friend. And you're watching that and you're thinking like, okay, these guys have been portrayed in a negative light until this point, and now the good guys are basically struggling with the idea of killing their friends. And so in my video, I countered that by saying that, yeah, they're presented as negatively, but at the same time, there's no action taken against them to fight the fascism. And instead, what Isayama focuses on is Eren. And like that's like it's kind of justified to focus on Eren because it's the rumbling. But at the same time, what Isayama did by focusing on Eren is bring the rise of a fascist society.
but I feel like that's very purposeful though, because I feel like you talk a lot about your video as far as like what is an anti-fascist story.
Hmm.
It's very interesting because you do make a lot of great points. I do feel like there's no denying One Piece is a much better anti-fascist take.
Right.
Same with if you want to take in Berserk or Vinland Saga. Those are obviously all great examples of what you can do to show a revolutionary approach, which I do feel like in retrospect and in history has been shown to be more important and more beneficial to uh, young people to see revolutionary stories. I do feel like that's important. That's something I've been talking about quite a bit recently, especially with everything going on in the news.
Yeah.
But I do feel like Iyasama or Isayama, I always mispronounce his name, wanted to do something different. And obviously maybe this is me giving him too much credit, but
Hmm.
this is another take on an anti-fascist take where we do see our POV is inside a military district and inside a
Right.
military ideology where we see how the Jaegerists sprout up from within the scouts, the very scouts we've been following since season one. That's where
Yeah.
they were harboring. That's where they were just festering inside the scouts. Like season four makes
Yeah.
that very clear. And then the scene where Zachary, who took over, in his hubris and in his military might, he's the
Yeah.
military coup d'etat guy. Zachary
Yeah.
got blown in half. And he really went to show like, oh shit, like karma. Like I
Hmm.
brought in this military aspect to my whole country. And now my own country wants to blow me up and blow me in half and cheer on my death. And when you see the, you know, give your heart, Shinzo Sasageo, you
Yeah.
hear it and it's like the violins start going crazy and you start to say, oh shit, we
Yeah.
were, we were, are we the bad guys? Like, have we been harboring fascism this whole time? And we were just now coming to terms with that, where our militarism just led to fascism because
Yeah.
we were blind to it. And I feel like it's very clearly showing you that this is what it leads to. And when Zachary gets blown in half and Pixis gets messed up too, he gets turned into a Titan. All
Yeah.
these military powerful leaders that we've been following for so long have now been killed by their own medicine. And I feel like
Yeah.
that was very much on purpose to show you that this is a different version, showing you the footsteps of a soldier on the ground to where this would lead to eventually the Jaegerists. And it would be difficult for a person who grew up in this culture to
Hmm.
now all of a sudden say, I got to put a gun to his head and blow his brains out
Yeah.
because he is going too far. So I saw it
Yeah.
as this cautionary tale of like, this is where we've come from. Oh shit, we got to kind of have to retrace our steps and try to take it back, even though it's probably too late. And even they say it's too late. So
Yeah. Okay. So what you're basically describing is what exactly happened in Japan in the 1920s and 30s. This was basically the rise of Japanese fascism, where right-wing elements started like coup d'etat the government, like a so-called democratic government, right? They kept coup d'etat the government, so, which forced the emperor to take the power back, right? And part of the right wing at the time, their motto was like, let's restore the emperor. Let's bring back the emperor. Let's give him all the power. This democracy isn't working. Japan is basically becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, and we have to build our might back up. And so what ICM is basically, and this is kind of what part one was jumping off. It was jumping off the rise of fascism and the road to fascism in Japan. But although it's a cautionary tale, and I've gotten a lot of people who had that reading. For me, for me, for it to be anti-fascist, you can't end your story with a fascist victory, if that makes sense.
do you feel like it is a fascist victory? You mean the
Yeah,
Jaegerists on top?
yeah. And people, they read that ending as like a super like, look at all these people like unhappy in the crowd and it's super doomers, and you're supposed to feel and get that reading that it's negative and it's bad. But then what ends up happening is that you don't get that thesis that Isayama pushed in the middle, where the enemies are supposed to be, find peace together and find commonality. Instead, the ending of Attack on Titan contradicts that thesis that he brings up halfway through, where instead of finding peace with your enemy, you have an eternal war that gets wages on, and then you have eventually the founder tree of Eren Yeager, which, like, if there's a season, oh god, those massacres will rise up again. But the point that I saw from the ending was that the cycle of violence didn't break. What instead happens is that the violence continues to spin and spin and spin until you reach the future where Eren Yeager becomes the founder. And God knows, God knows what kind of a founder he'll, he'll be, you know?
Yeah, I felt like maybe it's something that I took it. I very clearly saw that finale, and when I saw that the Jaegers were left taking over the island, I was immediately like, "Oh damn, we're screwed."
Yeah, exactly.
Like I read it as like there's no way that they're not gonna this idea of like focusing on military might and focusing on fear of retaliation from the outside world only
Mhm.
harbors more fascist ideology, which again is what the Jaegers do best. And that's why they ended up getting blown up anyway at the end,
Yeah,
because they still had the same system of power in place and they never took that down. And I felt like that's what it was meant to show, that the Jaegers were always wrong because their way of thinking and their way of doing things was always going to lead to inevitable annihilation. Um, but that's just how I took it because I do
yeah.
feel like
No,
it's
and
clearly showing you that. Yeah.
I respect that take, but at the same time, if you're writing an anti-fascist story, you have to have an element of liberation. You have to have an element of, and people really disagree with me who, and they claim like I love good and bad stories and the
Yeah.
positive, happy,
You need the
jolly
hope.
Disney, animes. But no matter how you read Attack on Titan's ending, that ending's gonna go in a perpetual ending of doomerism, right? It's like a perpetual ending of just war and war and war and war, and there's never that sigh of liberation. And for me, for me, you don't need a happy ending, right? I'm a fan of evangelican, neon evangelican, super dark and depressing anime. I'm a fan of Berserk. I'm a fan of Star Wars Rogue One, where everyone basically dies. You know, the spoilers, but it's an old movie. You know, I'm a fan of those really dark animes where liberation fails, and you know, it's like, oh shit, what's gonna happen next? But what happens here is that there's never there. It's just perpetual doomerism,
Yeah.
right? And that's the kind of that's the kind of way that I took it when I was constructing part three, the Doomerism of Attack on Titan, and part four, the Enemies of Hope. Because I get that cautionary tale, but at the end of the day, if you're gonna put in a thesis halfway through your manga about making peace with your enemies and end your manga with perpetual war, like the two theses are contradicting each other.
Yeah, but I feel like that's, I don't know, part of it is like I see the peace aspect of it as an ideology that is spelled out for you by Onyankopon, where he's
Hmm.
telling the Jaegerists, like, I was down for it. Like, I could have had the
Yeah,
peace, but then you
yeah,
turn fascist, and now that's the problem right there. That
yeah.
Jaegerist ideology is what's going to lead you down a path that doesn't even give you an option for peace,
Yeah.
where they refuse to take in that peace.
No,
Uh,
100%.
so that's how I read it more as like, yes, there's no hope, but there's no hope because we chose the
Yeah.
worst people to
But
lead us.
then you have to kind of throw in that anti-fascist element of liberation.
Sure,
That
and he doesn't do that. Yeah.
the only way you could achieve peace in this world now is if the world unites and takes out fascist parody, right? Just like
Mm,
World War II, where the Allies took out Nazi Germany, just like in
mm,
Spain where they took out Franco, just like in Italy where they took out Mussolini. They didn't just like the people who rose against those fascist dictators weren't like, okay, guys, they're in power now. Let's just chill out and give into doomerism and just give up our fight against them. No, it was like we're not gonna get peace until Mussolini is dead,
yeah.
basically.
I feel like there's a lot there, but I kind of want to jump to another aspect real quick because
Yeah.
I think we have to get to it. The real world aspects, there's no denying. I've always heard about the kind of Jewish interpretation of Attack on Titan, or the Jewish framing of Attack on Titan, like
Yeah.
whispers of it. And then obviously there was no denying it when season four started. And you saw the internment zones, you saw the concentration camps. And personally, again, as someone who's not very familiar with um, these Jewish conspiracy theories, I
Hmm.
didn't know about the blood libel stuff until like probably your video or like very recently. Um,
Yeah.
and then a couple TikToks that I saw talking about it as well. I always saw the entire framing of the concentration camps, the internment zones, the racism, all the stuff that we saw against the Eldians as very clearly wrong. It's never painted as like, yeah, we should
Hmm.
be racist against these people. Um, and then when I read the blood libel stuff, I mean, there's no denying that's an anti-Semitic trope. Um,
Yeah.
I can't deny that because that's very clearly there. It's kind of in your face. But then I kept going back to the reading of it, and
Hmm.
then the ending of the show. I got to tell you, man, the ending of the show ends, and when I see the Jaegerists on top, and I'm watching this finale that it aired like 2 weeks ago, so this is pretty
Yeah.
recent. The Jaegerists end up on top. And then they say, we focus all our might to creating the most powerful military. We focus all our power inside our military might. And that's what we focused on. We're a
Hmm.
tiny little independent state, and we're focused on fight, fight, fight. If we win, we die. If we fight, we win. And
Right.
then at the end, when we see the freaking Iron Dome, like the actual Iron Dome, I
Yeah.
was like, oh, there's no denying that this is what we're going for. And then I started to realize, like, wait a damn minute. Like, there's an actual, it's a very muddy, it's very weird. I won't deny that it has a lot of anti-Semitic tropes, but there's a very clear, like, anti-Zionist aspect to the ending of the show, where we do see how fascism breeds more fascism and it
Hmm.
breeds more authoritarianism. And then obviously with everything going on now, I was like, man, this is like bizarre timing. But I don't know what you take as like this whole reading and stuff that's going on now, because I see it in a very like, clearly negative light. Because as I said
Right.
before, the Jaegerists are never seen as good dudes.
Yeah.
So the ending, when they take over, they focus all their military might and they create like when you see those little missile Iron Dome things, I was like, all right,
Yeah.
this is the IDF. There's no denying that. That's what it
Hundred
is.
percent. It's accidental. I think like a lot of commenters have jumped in my video and they're like don't give him too much credit on this shit. It was accidental.
Yeah, you think so?
But I 100% think so.
Okay.
Well, actually, okay. So I've gotten a few comments about this, about the Palestinian kind of take, where they're like the Eldians resemble, I mean the people in parody resemble the Palestinians because they're placed in walls and blah blah blah, and Marley are basically the Zionists. And I'm like, that makes no sense. The Palestinians didn't build up their own walls to secure themselves. They didn't move out of their homeland to basically go and build up walls to secure themselves from Zionists. Like that reading, that doesn't work. Because like sure they're fighting against and trying to protect their homeland like the Palestinians, but you have to think about like who actually owns the land and what's actually going on in the occupation of Palestine, right? And I've gotten so many readings that are just coming at me. They're like, how could you forget about the Palestinian reading? And I'm like, oh man, don't do this,
See,
please.
I don't see it as I wouldn't see it as a Palestinian reading. I see it as like this idea of facing unimaginable evils,
Right.
unimaginable racism, unimaginable discrimination, murder, mass murder.
Yeah.
Idea of trying to preserve yourself to the point now of everyone else is my enemy
Yeah.
has now led to the very same mentality being used against who you consider to be your enemy.
Right.
And that to me was like the Israeli kind of connection.
Mm-hmm.
I see it, and I don't necessarily see it like he's saying this is cool.
Yeah.
I see it as him saying like this is what it can lead to, where
Yeah.
we do see how the fascist foot on your neck can lead to then you turning around and doing the same and
Yeah.
using the same systems and same mentalities.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely. Okay, so I want to wrap back to your initial comment, initial question about anti-Semitism. I think a lot of viewers at first, when they saw the armbands, when they saw the internment camps, they made the clear distinctions between the real life historic parallels. But when I finished part one, that was only like the surface of what I found, because then I got comments kind of getting at me and coming after me in a gentle kind of way, kind of being like, "Hey, you forgot about the anti-Semitism. How like why did you not make note of it in your video?" And to a lot of people who are reading Attack on Titans, who make videos to Attack on Titans, they feel um uncomfortable talking about the anti-Semitism, because then you have to get into the idea of like, what if I speak out? What if I get this all wrong? And so a large portion of my research was kind of tying what CM was presenting to um Nazi propaganda and how he was kind of spreading it. Because a lot of people are saying like it's a portrayal of Nazi propaganda, but betrayal differs from when you're basically taking the history of Jewish people who are interned in camps and saying they oppressed they once had a long empire. Sorry, you could cut this shit out, but basically they once had an empire that oppressed the Germans, in this case, the Marlians, and that they're interned because of the sins of their past. They're being interned as a punishment for having an empire that occupied Marley and tortured them and killed them, right? Where in the real life historic situation, that didn't happen. Jews were
Mhm.
not interned because they oppressed Germans. That's clear Nazi propaganda. And you're not actually like Islam is not actually combating that. He's not actually
Mm.
portraying it and then you know showing in the next episode or panel the lies of it. Rather, it's a
Yeah.
grounded truth. There was in fact an Eldian empire that did oppress Marlians. But
Yeah.
then when you're linking that to Jewish people, it becomes offensive because one, it shows Islam didn't actually research anything about Jewish people, and then secondly, he based the Eldians getting their powers off a blood libel, right? Like where Ymir was eaten by her own daughters, and then her daughters were eaten by others, and then the entire thing spread because they ate each other. Like that's what King Fritz was talking about when he was giving that long-winded speech. And then on top of all of that, when you skip back to Marley and the intern Eldian and the Libero zone, you have Tiber and Eldian having power and a ruling status in Marley. And he kind of distinguishes himself between the military wing, right? He says like, hey, I've been in the shadows, I've been kind of meddling around, but I gave you guys the power over the military. But then at the same time, he shows that huge gala where all the powerful figures from around the world gather. And it's not the rulers of Marley, it's not the military rulers of Marley who are there representing Marley. It's Willie Tiber, which showcases to people and the reader that Tiber is actually the leader and the influential figure in all of this. And he's an Eldian who hates his own blood, who basically allowed the internment of Eldians, which kind of like ties into how that conspiracy that uh Jews rule the world and the elders of Zion. And then like if you dig further, like I'm like there's so much, and I know I'm kind of rambling on at this time, but just to add a little extra layer is that the assumption that the Nazis had the Jews would bring the apocalypse. And so you have to ethnically cleanse them from German society in order to fight and combat the apocalypse. And here, and a lot of Jewish readers showed me, was that the apocalypse in Attack on Titan was the rumbling, that threat that one Eldian has the power to basically decimate the entire population of the world. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's basically the anti-Semitism. Um, I'll allow you to comment because I've been speaking for a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying. I feel like we shouldn't ignore a lot of Jewish fans and a lot of Jewish people who are bringing this type of stuff up because it makes us feel uncomfortable as Attack on Titan fans.
Mhm.
Speaking for myself, because there is, I mean, you spelled it out, right? There's no denying that there's a lot of weird anti-Semitic tropes inside the show. The only counter I have is that I don't know if any of those anti-Semitic tropes are used necessarily to undermine any of our main characters whatsoever, where at the end there's still the people who do their best to stop this horrifying thing that's going on
Mhm.
is the same people that we're saying this stuff about, where Armin, Jean, Reiner, all these
Yeah.
people who have been through this type of stuff are the ones stopping the genocide, are the ones stopping uh, their friend who is committing the genocide. So,
Yeah.
so I took it as like, even though there is this weird stuff in there, I don't think it was him necessarily saying, "Look how this is bad." I think it was him saying, "Look at the history and look at all these bizarre conspiracy theories of Jewish people. Let's say they're all real. Should we still treat them this way? Should we still step on them, put them in internment zones, treat them like shit, throw water in their face? Like all the racist shit we see in the show against the Eldians is seen in a very negative light, regardless of the history that we do know about Eldia. So, as an audience member, you do know that they did all those things, and yet we still feel like maybe they shouldn't be put in internment zones and treated like second citizens or like subclass citizens,
Mhm.
but instead treated like people. And maybe if you treat them like people, they could actually show you that they're above and beyond everyone else in some ways and can go against their own self-preservation and
Right.
save the world, like literally as we see in the end, where
Yeah.
our crew saves the world regardless of all the stuff that they had to go through. So to me, I felt like he was almost kind of head on trying to tackle those anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories and say, you know what? Even if they're all true, should we treat the Jewish people like this? Probably not, because if we do, they're probably going to harbor a lot of hate, and they're probably going to
Hmm.
harbor a lot of anger and turn towards violence. And
Yeah.
and there's still going to be a lot of people who are trying to stop them, even other Jews trying to stop, some pretty aggressive, um, angry Israeli people.
Yeah.
So that's how I read it. That was kind of my
Yeah.
interpretation.
I don't know. I think I think my response to a lot of people who came at me and told me that my take basically they read my take as in I there shouldn't be any real world parallels made in a story. And my response to that was no, that's absurd. But if you're actually going to take these real world historic situations, you got to be responsible. You got to know your history, and you further can't just put them into your story, but you have to directly combat them, right? You have to directly show your characters combat them. And that ending is really weird because Eldians are kind of still treated as monsters by the Marley officers, where they're like pointing their guns and they're like, "Hey, are you sure you're humans now? Are you sure you're not monsters?" Right? And I wish he had spent more time developing that relationship, showing how basically now there's an end to that, anti-Eldian kind of sentiment that the Marlians have, instead of, jumping in the future, jumping to the end, and just speed running it to the last panels. Right? There's so much to unpack in that ending that he didn't. He kind of was like, okay, now they're friends. Now, no, actually, no, he jumps over it. Basically, he's like, now Armin, Armin, Jane, Reiner, Levi are now basically the representatives of Eldians, and they somehow found peace with Marlians, right? And it's like a very short escape from unpacking all of that stuff that he set up in the Liberio camp, because you
Yeah.
don't just solve that in a second where you have your guns pointed at people and having them convince you that they're human. Like, no, you still have the world almost who are anti-Eldian, and you have to basically unpack that sentiment as well, right? I don't
Yeah.
know if that makes sense or not, but it's like a very rushed kind of ending and solution to what he brought up in the anti-Semitic portrayals.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably his messiest aspect of the show, where I think he tried to say something where he's like, "Hey, they've been oppressed and they're still fighting against wrongs," and I still think he did try to add some stuff in there about like the dangers of
Hmm.
what fascism can lead to, and what horrible atrocities can lead to from within your own people, and mentalities can shift as far as what's going on now, uh, with Israeli actions and bombings. I feel like
Yeah.
that's even another hint as far as what he was trying to communicate in there. I just felt like it was a little
Hmm.
bit muddy because of the real world, um, tropes that he was using in there, and certain conspiracy
Yeah.
theories that he might have thrown in there just to, dramatic effect or whatever.
Yeah.
I would agree that's definitely his messiest aspect. I just felt like he was just trying to say something positive in the end. I don't think he was
Hmm.
necessarily trying to say like, let's kill the Jews. Um,
No, for sure, but at the
yeah,
same time, the positive message gets undermined by that doomerist ending, right? Where it's like, okay, there's going to be a perpetual war. No one's going to get liberation. The world's never going to be at peace. And who knows how wrecked the world was after the rumbling. Like, he
yeah,
totally glosses over the environmental catastrophes, the
yeah.
ocean catastrophes. He's kind of just like, oh, the world just keeps going with war, and let's
Yeah,
not pay attention to everything that Eren stomped on and what exactly was the ramifications of the earth after the rumbling.
yeah. I felt like, but again, that's my reading is like, it's because the Jaegers rose up, uh, that they were again ending an inevitable war. Otherwise, I don't think there would have been inevitable war if it was some other form of leadership, or it wasn't a military fascist command. It wasn't a monarchy. It was a different form of leadership or a different form of
Yeah,
mentality that was taking over the island. I think it would have led to something different. And I think that's part of the message he was trying to communicate, as
maybe.
far as this kind of mentality will eventually lead to the cycle repeating because of that fear of retaliation and fear of
Or
the
he
outside
or
world.
he messed or he messed up, right? As in like because he had to focus on Eren, he couldn't write enough to take on the Jaegerists. And so at the end of the story, Eren was dead. And he was kind of like, okay, now we got a bunch of Jaegerists on this island who are fully militaristic. How do we end the story? We got like 5 pages left, guys. Okay, how do we do this? We just end it with perpetual war. There we go. That's it. I'm done. I'm walking out.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, but I feel like, again, I just don't see like everything we've seen of those people. Like, just beating up people, saying you have to live with, like, every time Flock comes on screen, it says something, man. It's always like the most
I mean,
like I will step on everyone else and I will do all the killing. Therefore, I am the leader of. I'm
it,
just like, bro, what?
it would have been interesting if he at least showed us who took on the reins after Floch, right?
Sure.
Like at least show us the leader who took
Yeah.
on Floch's role, right?
But one thing we
Like,
do see though is we see Niccolo and we see Sasha's dad in the background. I don't know if you caught
yeah.
that, giving them the biggest side eye ever.
I mean,
Uh
those two should be enough to bring down the entire Icarus movement.
Sasha's dad versus the freaking
One man
Jaegers.
army, one man army. He could do it.
Yeah, the old school hunter from the wilds. But I feel like that was purposeful. Again, I think that
No,
was
it
placed
was.
in there to show
Yeah,
you, like,
yeah,
hey, not everyone likes this on the island. Look at Sasha's dad being like super mad about it. Um, and same with
yeah.
Niccolo, who feels like he's
No, hundred
being
percent.
pushed away. Um, yeah, that's just
Yeah,
my reading because
yeah.
I I would get you if I was like one of those fans who loves the Jaegers, which I don't get and I don't understand and I never will. Um, because there's a lot of them out there. And I
Oh
just
yeah,
think they're just,
those are the wildest fans.
I just feel like they're just openly misreading what's there. Like, there's no way. This guy's literally twirling his mustache and he doesn't even have one. Like, it's crazy how,
I mean, they basically are Floch at this point.
yeah, there's like, come on now, man. That's too much. Last thing I want to end on, man, and I'll let you
Yeah.
go here, is talking about now with what we're facing in this world, not just if I'm in the US, western part of the hemisphere, but everything going on in the Middle East, everything going on inside this world that we're living in, with capitalism, with overwhelming odds against systems of power trying to step on people, silence people. Why do you feel like we should see more uplifting stories and more revolutionary type stories? And why do you feel like it's necessary to try to critique certain media that maybe doesn't do that?
Well, first of all, I want to end by saying that Attack on Titan's stance of doomerism, of basically the inevitability of violence, is something that I wanted to counter and critique heavily because the entire story is written with an inevitable kind of take. There is no alternative path. There is no actual rounded resistance that are actually actively fighting for liberation. It's mostly like and you could look into this if you want, but he initially wanted to end the story by killing everyone off. Like that was his legit ending where he was like, okay, and this was near season 2. That's why the season 2 3 jump is kind of patchy if you ever watch the show from episode 1 to whatever. But anyways, it took off and he kind of was like, okay, I can't kill off everyone, but I'm gonna lead it to an inevitable ending where the world basically ends with doomerism. And so part of my animes of hope was to illustrate animes and mangas that get into stories of liberation that uplift people that fight against doomerism and depression and despair and that inevitable, idea of like the world is ending. What do we do? We don't do anything. We can't do anything, right? And to me, that was the most important part of my video of basically highlighting animes of hope and showcasing people that these stories are necessary in times like these because there's struggles for oppression that are happening all around us and we can't just give in to doomerism and submit to it, right? You have to resist, you have to fight. And although people counter me and say Attack on Titan is all about fighting, it's all about resistance, it's about, the fight, but Eden's fight isn't actually a fight for liberation. It's more like, okay, I'm gonna fight and defeat all my enemies, all of them, whoever they are, right? All the world, the entire world is my enemy, for my people to be at peace and protected. And it's a very genocidal kind of take. And people really, really found it uncomfortable that I portrayed Eren as and his genocide similar to America's shock and awe and Israel's bombing of Gaza, where he basically calls everyone human animals and just stomps over all of them. Because in his view, he's basically like a god and he could do whatever he wants with the fate of the world. And so, in my countering of the animes of hope, I wanted to illustrate stories that go against fate, that go against the gods, and basically bring an end in liberation. And I know it sounds kind of Disney-like and it sounds kind of too good to be true, but there's a lot of cases in history. If you look at Algeria, Vietnam, all over Southeast Asia when they're fighting against the Japanese, there have been moments where, against huge military odds, the resistance won. And stories were based off that. Like Star Wars, for an example, is basically a story of Vietnam. And I don't know, I feel like in a time where the world is just going to shit, you gotta have a nice, hopeful story, or else you're gonna end up like Eren, who's just who's just an edgy doomer.
Yeah, I feel like that's if there's a takeaway that I can say as well is like that's the mentality. I feel like there's a tendency to elevate fictional heroes in an aspect where they can accomplish things that we cannot, where we can find hope in them. And I feel like that's absolutely great and that's good and that's sometimes necessary inside, again, this world that we live in. But I feel like placing that inside a character like Aaron is not the right thing to do because that's not what he represents at all. And I feel like a lot of people mistakenly say like Superman, you know, Cassian Andor from Star Wars,
Yeah.
Katniss Everdeen, Aaron Yeager, and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa! One of those is not the same as the
I
other.
mean, I mean, early Eren was hopeful.
Yeah,
He had those bright eyes. Although he did have like mass murder tendencies early on.
yeah,
He did want freedom. People look at that early Eren and they're like, look, he's all for freedom, guys. It's all for
yeah,
freedom. He's just like Superman. And
yeah,
then,
definitely not. And I feel like you make a good point of pointing out Luffy, who is the better counter to that, someone
yeah,
who's actually about revolutionary type stuff and wants to be a leader for a better world and for a revolution. And I feel
yeah.
like that's a better example. So that's a good takeaway to not inflate these kind of characters and to take away the wrong message from Attack on Titan. Because if I have a takeaway, I feel like the misreadings of Attack on Titan are easier to do because they are, like I said in the beginning, very sporadic and very all over the
Mhm.
place. And that's something you point out,
Yeah,
where a lot of people are like, well, actually, Aaron was right the whole time. Flock was right the whole time. Jaeger is what
yeah,
should we should strive for. And I'm like, that's the wrong takeaway from the show. And
right.
even I think you would agree that the show is very clearly telling you that that's not, at least when it comes to like every time those people come on screen, there's a sense of dread and there's not a sense of
Right.
hope. And it's not supposed to be uplifting in any way. It's supposed to be
Hmm.
like these guys are evil. Um,
Yeah,
every speech they have is very much I'm going to stomp the world, rule under me. You have to listen to me or get shot in the head. Like
right.
that's the kind of evil stuff we want to avoid. So that's what I would recommend to people watching this video is to try and uh, take a look at what you're taking in when in the media and maybe critique it a little bit more. And so maybe look for
Yeah.
something a little more helpful. So
No, for sure. But for the people who watching, my main goal of making my part two wasn't to go after Attack on Titan fans. It was rather to convert Attack on Titan fans to One Piece. That entire part four, that entire editing spree that I went on was to convert as many Attack on Titan fans to One Piece. So
yeah,
that later on they'll come to my video and be like, hey man, I watched your video. I'm now a One Piece fan. I used to be an Attack on Titan fan.
yeah. No, that's great, man. And I feel like that's important
Yeah.
because again, we want to find these stories that do
Yeah.
push
No, for sure.
towards something better. So, Lost,
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on, man. Where can everyone find you?
I'm Lost Futures 1 on Twitter, where it's held. But
Yeah.
you could also find me on Lost Futures at youtube.com. Those are the two main areas that I kind of meddle in. Yeah, next video is going to be on Palestine, and I've kind of finished the script, but I'm still adding stuff, so hopefully it'll be out soon.
Check that out for sure. You can find me on Twitter at Squad Leader Race, and you can find us at First Cut TMO. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, all that good stuff. But either way, guys, for the Attack on Titan crew, we're gonna be peacing out. So peace.